The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of papers being placed on the defense table. Marcus Sullivan sat frozen, his expensive suit suddenly feeling too tight, as he watched two women walking together, his wife, his mistress, side by side, and in that moment, he knew his carefully constructed world was about to burn to the ground. But to understand how a man who thought he controlled everything lost it all, we need to go back 18 months. Back to when Marcus believed he was untouchable. Back to when he was playing a game so twisted that even those closest to him had no idea they were pieces on his board. This is the story of Marcus Sullivan, a man who didn't just cheat on his wife. He weaponized another woman to terrorize her. Marcus Sullivan woke up every morning at 5:47 a.m., not because of an alarm, but because control was his religion, and discipline was how he worshipped. At 42, he had the kind of presence that commanded rooms, 6'2", silver threading through dark hair, a smile that seemed warm until you noticed it never quite reached his eyes. He rolled over in the California king bed, careful not to disturb Elena. She was still sleeping or pretending to sleep. Marcus could never quite tell anymore, and frankly, he didn't care. What mattered was that she stayed exactly where he wanted her, quiet, compliant, and too afraid to question anything. He went through his morning routine with mechanical precision. Shower, shave, check Elena's phone location history from the tracker app he'd installed for her safety. Review the credit card activity. All purchases required his approval. She'd learned that lesson 3 years ago when he'd frozen her cards for buying groceries without asking first. You need to learn financial responsibility, he'd told her then, his voice carrying that edge of disappointment that cut deeper than shouting. I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to protect us. By the time Marcus came downstairs, Elena was already in the kitchen. She'd learned his preferences down to the minute. Coffee at exactly 6:23 a.m., 2 eggs over medium, toast barely golden. She moved around the kitchen with the careful precision of someone walking through a minefield. Good morning, she said softly, placing his plate down without meeting his eyes. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He scrolled through his phone, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. It was a small thing, barely noticeable to anyone watching. But Elena noticed. She always noticed. I'll be late tonight, he finally said. Business dinner with potential investors. Okay. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Should I keep dinner warm? Or... Don't wait up. He stood, adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, and grabbed his briefcase. At the door, he turned back. Oh, and Elena, your sister called yesterday. I told her you called back, but maybe give a few days. You know how she gets you worked up with all her opinions about our marriage. It wasn't suggestion. Elena nodded, and something behind her eyes dimmed just a little bit more. Marcus smiled. I love you. Have a good day. The door closed behind him, and Elena stood alone in their designer kitchen, surrounded by marble countertops and stainless steel appliances that cost more than most people's cars. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. She couldn't remember when they'd started shaking all the time. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that there was no business dinner. Marcus had a different kind of appointment. The Riverside Hotel bar was dimly lit, designed for discretion. Marcus arrived at 6:47 p.m., ordered a scotch, and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Isabelle Carter walked in at 6:52 p.m., and Marcus allowed himself a small smile. She was exactly on time, just like their previous 3 meetings. Punctual, ambitious, eager to please. Perfect. Marcus. Isabelle's face lit up when she saw him. At 32, she had the kind of energy Marcus found both useful and exhausting. Bright-eyed, optimistic, still believing that hard work and good intentions could overcome anything. Isabelle. He stood, kissed her cheek, let his hand linger just a moment on her lower back as he guided her to their booth. You look beautiful. She blushed. 3 meetings in, and she still blushed. This was going to be easier than he'd thought. They'd met 6 weeks ago at a marketing conference in Seattle. Marcus had positioned himself strategically, sitting alone at the hotel bar after his keynote speech, looking just vulnerable enough to be approachable. Isabelle had been attending the conference to scout new business opportunities for her firm. She'd recognized him, complimented his presentation, and Marcus had done what he did best. He'd listened. He'd listened to her talk about her career ambitions, her recent breakup, her frustration with men who couldn't handle a woman with drive. And then, slowly, carefully, he'd started sharing. Not too much at first. Just hints. A heavy sigh. A moment of carefully crafted sadness. "I'm sorry," he'd said that first night. "I shouldn't burden you with my problems. It's just, sometimes it's hard being in a marriage where you feel more like a prisoner than a partner." Isabelle had leaned in. "You're married?" "Legally, yes." Marcus had looked down at his drink. Vulnerability personified. "In every way that matters? I've been alone for years." Now, 6 weeks later, Isabelle sat across from him with concern written all over her face. "How are things at home?" she asked quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly, a man bearing invisible weights. "Worse. She's becoming more controlling, more paranoid. Yesterday she accused me of lying about where I was, demanded to see my phone. He paused, rubbed his face with both hands. "I'm starting to worry about her mental state, honestly." "Oh, Marcus." Isabelle reached across the table, took his hand. "Have you thought about therapy? For her, I mean?" "I've suggested it. She refuses. Says there's nothing wrong with her, that I'm the problem." He looked at Isabelle with those carefully wounded eyes. "Sometimes I wonder if she's right. Maybe I'm not a good husband. Maybe I deserve." "Stop." Isabelle squeezed his hand. "Don't let her gaslighting make you question yourself. You're one of the kindest, most genuine men I've ever met." Marcus smiled sadly. He was performing a symphony, and she couldn't hear a single false note. They talked for 2 hours. Marcus shared more fabricated stories about Elena's controlling behavior, how she monitored his emails, questioned his friendships, made him account for every minute of his time. Each lie was carefully constructed, each detail designed to paint himself as the victim and Elena as the villain. What made it so effective was that Marcus was describing his own behavior. He was simply swapping the roles. "I need to tell you something," Isabelle said as they were preparing to leave. She looked nervous, vulnerable. "These past few weeks, talking to you, it's meant a lot to me, more than maybe it should." Marcus took both her hands. "It's meant a lot to me, too. You reminded me what it feels like to be seen. Really seen. Is that wrong? I mean, you're technically still married, and I—" "What's wrong," Marcus interrupted gently, "is staying in something broken out of obligation while denying yourself happiness. What's wrong is letting someone else's dysfunction define your life." He paused. "I'm going to leave her, Isabelle. I need to do it carefully, make sure everything is handled right. She's not stable, and I worry about what she might do. But I promise you, I'm going to build a life where I can actually be happy. And if you want to be part of that life—" "I do." The words came out as barely a whisper. "I really do." They kissed in the parking lot. Isabelle's back against her car, Marcus's hands in her hair. And as he held her, Marcus was calculating. This was working perfectly. Isabelle was now emotionally invested. She believed his story. More importantly, she believed she was saving him. Now came the delicate part, making sure Elena knew about Isabelle, while making sure Isabelle believed Elena was dangerous. Marcus pulled back, looked at Isabelle with manufactured concern. "Promise me something. If Elena ever contacts you, and she might if she's been monitoring me, don't engage. She can be unpredictable when she feels threatened. I don't want you getting hurt because of my mess." "I promise," Isabelle said. But even as she agreed, a small seed of unease planted itself in her mind. Something about the intensity in Marcus's eyes, the way he talked about his wife's unpredictability. She pushed the thought away. Marcus needed her. And God, it felt good to be needed. Elena heard Marcus come home at 11:34 p.m. She'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she'd become this person, this frightened, hollow version of who she used to be. She used to be Elena Whitmore, a designer whose work was featured in magazines. She used to have friends who called her fearless, a family who called her brilliant. She used to have opinions, boundaries, a voice that didn't shake. That was before Marcus. She heard him moving around downstairs. The sound of the refrigerator opening, water running, his footsteps on the stairs. Elena closed her eyes, tried to regulate her breathing. The therapist she'd seen once, before Marcus found out and made her cancel all future appointments because couples should work through things together, not air their problems to strangers, had taught her a breathing technique. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. It didn't help anymore. Marcus entered the bedroom, and Elena felt her entire body tense. He moved around the room, undressing, hanging up his suit. The smell of perfume, not hers, clung to his shirt collar. "You're still awake," he said. "Not a question. Couldn't sleep?" Marcus climbed into bed, and Elena instinctively moved to give him space. He noticed. He always noticed. "Are you mad about something?" "No, I just—" "Because if you're mad, just say it. I can't read your mind. Elena, the passive-aggressive thing is exhausting. I'm not mad. I'm really not. I just—" She stopped herself. What could she say? That she smelled another woman on him? He'd tell her she was being paranoid, imagining things, that her suspicion was proof of her instability. "I'm sorry. I'm just tired." Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "You know what? I've been trying so hard to make this work, but I don't think you want to be happy. I think you'd rather be miserable so you can blame me for everything wrong in your life." "That's not true," Elena whispered, tears already forming. "Please, Marcus, I'm not trying to. I don't want to fight." He turned away from her, his back a wall. "Let's just go to sleep." Elena lay there in the dark, crying silently, wondering how someone could feel so alone while lying next to another person. She didn't know that the perfume on Marcus's collar had been applied deliberately. She didn't know that he positioned himself so she would smell it. She didn't know that her tears, her fear, her confusion, all of it was exactly what he wanted. Control wasn't just about rules and restrictions. It was about making someone question their own reality until they didn't trust themselves at all. And Marcus Sullivan was a master of his craft. 3 weeks after that night, Elena found the messages. It wasn't intentional. She wasn't snooping, wasn't looking for proof of anything. Marcus had left his tablet on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and a notification had popped up. Elena had glanced at it reflexively, and her entire world had tilted sideways. "Isabelle, can't stop thinking about last night. You make me feel things I didn't think I was capable of feeling anymore." Elena's hands went numb. She stared at the screen, her brain struggling to process the words. Part of her wanted to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen it, but her hands, moving independently of conscious thought, swiped open the tablet. The passcode screen appeared. Elena's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She knew his passcode. He'd made her memorize it in case of emergencies. But using it felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She entered the numbers. The messages opened, and Elena's stomach dropped. Weeks of conversations. Intimate messages. Photos, nothing explicit, but intimate in a way that was somehow worse. Isabelle at a restaurant, smiling at the camera with "Wish you were here" as the caption. Marcus responding with heart emojis, with promises, with words he'd never said to Elena. "Not in years. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to get out. I just need to be strategic about it. She's not stable, and I need to make sure I protect myself legally." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not her heart, that had been broken so many times. It was mostly scar tissue at this point. This was something deeper. This was the last fragile thread of hope that maybe, somehow, things could get better. She heard the shower turn off upstairs. Panic seized her. Elena closed the tablet, placed it exactly where Marcus had left it, and backed away like it was radioactive. Her mind was screaming at her. Run. Grab your keys. Get out. Go anywhere, but her body wouldn't obey. Where would she go? She had no money of her own. Marcus controlled all the accounts. Her credit cards were in his name. She hadn't spoken to her sister in months because Marcus had convinced her that her family was toxic and trying to sabotage their marriage. By the time Marcus came downstairs, Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Hey!" Marcus looked at her, then at his tablet. Something flickered across his face. Calculation rather than concern. "You okay?" Elena opened her mouth. Words formed and died on her tongue. Finally, "Who's Isabelle?" The silence that followed felt like falling. Marcus picked up his tablet slowly, looked at the screen. When he looked back at Elena, his expression had shifted into something she'd seen before, but never quite understood. It wasn't anger. It was colder than that. "You went through my messages." His voice was flat. There was a notification. "I saw. You went through my private messages." Each word was precise, clipped. "You violated my privacy." Again. Again? "Marcus, I've never. You're always watching me, questioning me, making me feel like I'm under surveillance in my own home." He was moving now, pacing, building momentum. "Do you have any idea what that's like? To feel like you can't breathe without someone monitoring you." Elena felt reality sliding sideways. "You're the one who monitors me. You track my phone. You control all the money. You! I protect us. I make sure we're secure. And this is how you repay me? By invading my privacy, by proving that you have absolutely zero trust or respect for me." Marcus slammed his hand on the counter, and Elena flinched. He noticed a flinch, and something in his eyes sharpened. "Are you afraid of me, Elena? Is that what you want me to believe? That I'm some kind of monster?" "No, Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You're building a narrative. Poor Elena, trapped with terrible Marcus. It's so much easier to play the victim than to take responsibility for your part in why this marriage is falling apart." "I saw the messages," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You're having an affair. I'm having conversations with someone who actually listens to me. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly under attack." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, the picture of a man pushed to his limits. "Yes, I've been talking to Isabelle. Yes, maybe it's crossed some lines. But do you know why? Because here, in this house, I feel suffocated. I feel like nothing I do is ever good enough for you." "That's not..." Elena was crying now, full sobs that made it hard to speak. "That's not true. I've done everything you asked. I've changed everything about myself to make you happy." "Have you?" Marcus's voice dropped to something dangerously soft. "Or have you just become more resentful, more passive-aggressive, more determined to prove that I'm the villain in your story?" Elena couldn't speak anymore. This was what Marcus did. He took reality and twisted it until she couldn't tell which way was up, until she couldn't trust her own memories, her own perceptions, until she apologized for things he'd done to her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have looked at your messages." "No, you shouldn't have." Marcus sat down across from her, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted to something gentler, concerned. "Elena, I'm worried about you. This paranoia, this need to control and monitor everything I do, it's not healthy. I think you need to talk to someone. You said therapy was individual therapy for you to work through these trust issues, this anxiety." He reached across the table, took her hand. His touch felt like ice. "I love you. I want this marriage to work. But I can't fix this alone. You need to meet me halfway." Elena looked down at their joined hands. She wanted to pull away. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that she saw exactly what he was doing, that she wasn't crazy, that none of this was her fault. Instead, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll find a therapist." Marcus smiled. "That's my girl. We're going to get through this." He stood, kissed the top of her head. "I need to make some calls. Work stuff. Why don't you rest? You look exhausted." He walked away, and Elena sat alone at the kitchen table, wondering how she'd just apologized for discovering his affair. That night, after Elena had cried herself into a fiddle-exhausted sleep, Marcus sat in his home office and composed a message. "Marcus, she knows about us. Found messages on my tablet. Just like I warned you, she's becoming unstable. The way she confronted me. Isabelle, I'm genuinely concerned about what she might do, to herself or to anyone she sees as a threat. He hit send and waited. The response came within minutes. Isabelle. Oh my God, Marcus, are you okay? Is she threatening you? Marcus. She's unpredictable right now. I'm going to suggest she get professional help. I just need you to be careful. Okay? If she contacts you, don't engage. Promise me. Isabelle, I promise. Marcus, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. You don't deserve any of it. Marcus, I have you. That's what's keeping me going. Knowing there's someone out there who sees me for who I really am. Soon, I'll figure out how to leave safely. And then we can finally start our life together. Isabelle, I can't wait. I love you. Marcus stared at those 3 words. He didn't respond with the same phrase. Instead, you're my light in all this darkness. Talk tomorrow. He closed the messaging app and opened his banking software. It was time to start moving assets. If Elena would start to question things, he needed to accelerate his timeline. Not because he was actually planning to leave. Divorce was expensive and complicated, and Marcus enjoyed his life exactly as it was. But he needed Elena to believe he might leave. He needed her living in constant fear of abandonment, constantly trying to prove she was worthy of staying. And he needed Isabelle to believe she was his salvation, his future, his reason for enduring. The truth? They were both tools. Isabelle was the weapon he used to terrorize Elena. Elena was a victim whose fear and compliance fed something dark and hungry inside him. And Marcus was the puppet master who needed both of them playing their roles perfectly. He transferred $50,000 to an offshore account he'd opened in the name of a shell corporation. Tomorrow, he'd ask Isabelle to hold some money for him. Money he needed to keep safe from Elena's attempts to control the finances. Isabelle would agree because she believed she was helping him escape. What she wouldn't know was that the money was already his, and he was creating a paper trail that made her look complicit in financial deception. If she ever tried to leave, if she ever woke up to what he really was, he'd have insurance. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, looking around his home office. Photos on the walls, him with business partners, him accepting awards, him and Elena on their wedding day. In that photo, Elena was radiant, genuinely happy. Marcus barely recognized the woman she'd been. He'd systematically dismantled her, isolated her from friends and family, convinced her that her perceptions were wrong, her emotions were excessive, her independence was selfishness. He'd taken a confident, successful woman and transformed her into someone who couldn't make a decision about what to eat for dinner without anxiety. And now, he was doing a variation of the same thing to Isabelle. Not through overt control. She wouldn't tolerate that. But through making her believe she was a savior, his partner in escape, the only person who truly understood him. He was building her entire identity around being the woman who rescued Marcus Sullivan. When that identity crumbled, and the psychological devastation would be catastrophic. Marcus smiled in the darkness of his office. Some people collected stamps or vintage cars. He collected broken women and the intoxicating power that came from being the one who broke them. Upstairs, Elena sobbed in her sleep, trapped in nightmares. Down the street, Isabelle lay awake, texting with friends about the amazing but complicated man she was falling for, certain that love would conquer all. And Marcus slept perfectly well. Over the next 3 months, Marcus operated with the precision of a chess grandmaster playing simultaneous games. With Elena, he intensified the psychological control while maintaining plausible deniability. He suggested couples therapy, then systematically undermined every session. He'd agreed to the therapist's suggestions in the office. Then at home, he'd frame Elena's attempts to implement them as attacks. When the therapist suggested they practice emotional check-ins, where each person shared their feelings without judgment, Marcus used it as a weapon. "I'm feeling attacked," he'd say whenever Elena expressed any need or boundary. "I'm feeling like you're trying to control me again. I'm feeling like nothing I do is ever enough." The therapist, seeing only the 90-minute sessions and not the other 165 hours a week, started suggesting that perhaps Elena needed to work on creating a safer space for Marcus to be vulnerable. Elena, already doubting her own reality, internalized this completely. She became hyper-vigilant about Marcus's emotional state, constantly monitoring his mood, adjusting her behavior to avoid setting him off. She was so focused on managing his feelings that she stopped having any of her own. Meanwhile, Marcus accelerated his relationship with Isabelle, but always with carefully placed obstacles. He'd plan romantic getaways, then cancel last minute with stories about Elena's episodes. "She found out I was going to Seattle and completely broke down," he told Isabelle after canceling their planned weekend together. "She was threatening to hurt herself if I left. I had to stay. I couldn't live with myself if something happened." Isabelle, her heart breaking for him, responded exactly as he calculated. "Of course you have to stay. Your safety comes first. We'll have our time eventually." What Isabelle didn't know was that Elena had no idea Marcus was planning to go to Seattle. The breakdown was complete fiction, but the cancellation served multiple purposes. It made Isabelle more invested. Scarcity creates value. It reinforced a narrative about Elena's instability, and it gave Marcus a thrill of pulling strings and watching his puppets dance. He did take Isabelle on some trips, to conferences where he was speaking, where their relationship could be disguised as professional. In San Francisco, he introduced her to colleagues as his marketing consultant. In Chicago, they had dinner with his business partners, and Marcus made subtle comments that painted him as a man trapped in a difficult marriage. "My wife doesn't travel anymore," he'd say with a sad smile. "She's going through some things. Mental health struggles. It's been challenging." His colleagues would nod sympathetically, and Isabelle would squeeze his hand under the table, silently communicating, "I'm here. You're not alone." Marcus was building a narrative in his professional circle, too, setting the stage. If Elena ever tried to reach out for help, everyone who mattered already believed she was unstable. If anyone ever questioned his relationship with Isabelle, he could point to months of openly acknowledging their professional connection. "We became close during a difficult time in my life. I'm not proud of how it started, but I can't regret finding someone who helped me survive." But cracks were beginning to show. Isabelle started noticing inconsistencies. Small things at first. Marcus claimed Elena controlled all their finances, but he had access to amounts of money that didn't align with that story. He had multiple credit cards, investment accounts, and once Isabelle saw a statement showing a $250,000 balance in an account solely in his name. When she asked about it, Marcus had a ready explanation. "That's from before the marriage. I've kept it separate because I learned the hard way that Elena gets obsessive about money. If she knew that account existed, she'd want to control that too." It was plausible. Isabelle accepted it. But the unease lingered. There were other things. The way Marcus talked about Elena was becoming obsessive. He brought her up constantly, even in moments that had nothing to do with her. He'd be describing a business strategy and suddenly shift to, "Elena could never understand complexity like this. Her mind just doesn't work that way." When Isabelle mentioned wanting to take a pottery class, Marcus said, "That's so Elena used to do creative things, but she gave them all up, claimed she was too depressed. But I think she just uses that as an excuse for being lazy." The cruelty was starting to show through, and sometimes, when Marcus talked about what he'd do once I'm free of her, there was an edge to his voice that made Isabelle's skin prickle. "She's going to try to take everything," he said one night over dinner. They were at a restaurant in the city, celebrating a deal Marcus had just closed. "I know how her mind works. She'll play the victim, claim I'm the monster, and try to destroy me financially. But if you have documentation of her issues, won't that protect you?" Isabelle asked carefully. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm building a case. Documentation, witnesses, evidence. When the time comes, I'll make sure everyone sees the truth about who she really is." Something about the way he said it made Isabelle's stomach turn. This wasn't a man planning to leave a bad marriage. This was a man planning to destroy someone. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I know she's hurt you, but do you think maybe you're letting anger cloud your judgment? When you talk about her like this, it doesn't sound like you want freedom. It sounds like you want revenge." For just a moment, Marcus's mask slipped. His eyes went cold, calculating. Then the warmth returned, and he reached across the table to take her hand. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just hard being stuck in something so toxic, while trying to build something healthy with you. Sometimes my frustration gets the better of me." Isabelle wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, because if she was wrong about Marcus, if he wasn't the victim he claimed to be, then what did that make her? She'd fallen in love with a married man, helped him hide money, told him repeatedly that his wife was the problem. If she was wrong about him, then she was complicit in something terrible. So she pushed the doubts away. She smiled, squeezed his hand back, and said, "I understand. We'll get through this together." But that night, alone in her apartment, Isabelle opened her laptop and started searching. Signs of emotional abuse in relationships. Coercive control tactics. How abusers isolate their victims. The articles she found described behaviors that sounded disturbingly familiar, but they described Marcus's actions toward Elena, not Elena's toward Marcus. Isabelle closed her laptop. She wasn't going to do this. She wasn't going to let paranoia poison something good. Marcus loved her. He was trying to escape a toxic situation. The doubts were just her fear of commitment, her old patterns of self-sabotage. She texted Marcus, "I love you. Sorry if I made things harder tonight. You deserve someone who believes in you completely." His response came 5 minutes later. "You are that someone. Don't ever doubt that. Or us." Isabelle went to sleep feeling reassured. Meanwhile, Marcus forwarded her message to a private folder labeled Insurance, where he'd been saving screenshots of every message in which Isabelle expressed support for leaving Elena, every instance where she'd been critical of his wife, every piece of evidence that she was knowingly involved in an affair with a married man. By month 4, Marcus made his next move. He asked Isabelle to loan him money. "I need to hire a lawyer," he explained. They were at her apartment. Marcus having told Elena he was at a business conference in Denver, someone who specializes in high-conflict divorces. "But if I use our joint accounts, Elena will see the transactions and completely panic. She might do something drastic." "How much do you need?" Isabelle asked. $25,000. "I know it's a lot. I'll pay you back the moment I have access to accounts she can't monitor." Isabelle had $30,000 in her savings, money she'd been putting away for years, planning to eventually buy a small house. Lending it out meant that dream would be delayed. But Marcus needed her. He was finally taking steps to leave. This was proof that their future was real. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need." Marcus kissed her deeply. "I don't deserve you." What Isabelle didn't know was that Marcus already had 6 lawyers on retainer for various business ventures. He didn't need her money, but accepting it served multiple purposes. It made her financially invested in their relationship, created evidence of her helping him hide assets from his wife should he ever need to threaten her into silence, and gave him a tangible measure of control over her. The money was transferred on a Tuesday. By Friday, Marcus had deposited it in one of his offshore accounts. He sent Isabelle a photo of paperwork that looked legal and official, actually just a contract for a corporate merger he'd pulled from his files, with a message. "It's official. The process has started. Soon I'll be free, and we can finally have the life we've been dreaming about." Isabelle cried with relief. Finally, after months of waiting, it was happening. Elena, meanwhile, was having a breakdown. She'd started therapy as Marcus had suggested, but the therapist was making things worse, not better. During sessions, Elena would try to explain how she felt, constantly monitored, financially controlled, afraid to voice opinions. But when she gave specific examples, they sounded paranoid even to her own ears. "He tracks my location," she'd say. "Is that for safety purposes?" the therapist would ask. "Does he track his own location too, for accountability?" "Yes, but..." "So it's mutual transparency, not control?" Elena didn't know how to explain that mutual transparency between unequal parties isn't actually mutual. That when one person holds all the financial power, all the social connections, all the resources, the transparency is just another form of surveillance. The therapist meant well, but she was trained to see relationship problems as symmetrical, as issues where both parties contribute to the dysfunction. She wasn't trained to identify asymmetrical abuse, where one person systematically dismantles the other's autonomy. After 8 sessions, The therapist suggested that perhaps Elena had unresolved trauma from her childhood that was being projected onto her marriage. She recommended medication for anxiety. Marcus, in a show of concern, went with Elena to the psychiatrist appointment. In the waiting room, he held her hand. When the doctor asked if anyone wanted to provide collateral information about Elena's mental state, Marcus volunteered. "She's been increasingly paranoid," he said, his voice heavy with concern, "accusing me of things that aren't true, having emotional outbursts over small issues. I'm worried about her." The doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and suggested Elena take a leave from any stressful activities. Elena started taking the pills. Within 2 weeks, the edge of her fear had dulled into a hazy numbness. She drifted through days in a fog. She stopped questioning things, stopped noticing things. Marcus told her this was progress. "You seem so much more relaxed," he'd say. "This is the real you, without all that anxiety." What he didn't say was that the real her was someone too medicated to fight back. 3 months into this new reality, Marcus left a USB drive in Isabelle's apartment. Deliberately, hidden but not well hidden. He wanted her to find it. Isabelle found the USB drive on a Saturday morning. She was cleaning her apartment, moving the couch to vacuum underneath, when she spotted it near the baseboard. Small, black, generic. No label. It must have fallen out of Marcus's bag during his last visit, she reasoned. She should have just given it back to him. Should have texted, "Hey, found your USB drive." Instead, she plugged it into her laptop. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain why. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of all those small doubts. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just bad timing and bad luck. But in that moment, sitting on her couch with her laptop open, Isabelle clicked on the drive's folder. What she found would haunt her for the rest of her life. There were folders within folders. She opened one labeled Financial Docs. Inside were bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds. And as Isabelle scrolled through them, her confusion grew. Every account was in Marcus's name. Not joint accounts. Not accounts controlled by Elena. Accounts solely belonging to Marcus Sullivan, containing amounts that made Isabelle's head spin. A primary checking account with $340,000. Investment portfolios worth over $2 million. A property deed for their house that listed Marcus as the sole owner, purchased 3 years before his marriage to Elena. None of this aligned with Marcus's stories about Elena controlling the finances. Isabelle's hands started shaking. She opened another folder. Legal. Inside were divorce consultation documents. But they weren't recent. They were dated 5 months ago, before Marcus had ever asked Isabelle for money, before he claimed he was just starting the divorce process. She read through the consultation notes, and her blood went cold. Client expresses concern about protecting assets in divorce. Notes that wife has no separate income. All accounts in client's name. Client wants to ensure maximum financial advantage. Wife currently believes she has no options to leave. This didn't sound like a man worried about an abusive spouse. This sounded like a predator. Isabelle opened another document. It was a timeline meticulously detailed. Strategy, established pattern of wife's mental instability. Recommended actions, suggest therapy but undermine treatment. Document any emotional responses as episodes. Build witness network that can testify to instability. Long-term goal. If divorce becomes necessary, ensure wife is left with minimal resources and custody rights. The laptop screen blurred as Isabelle's eyes filled with tears. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be the man she'd fallen in love with. She kept reading. There were more files. Screenshots of messages. Some of them were her own messages to Marcus. He'd been saving them, cataloging them, building a file. Next to them were notes in Marcus's handwriting. I, expressing loyalty and support for leaving E, can be used to demonstrate IS awareness and participation if needed for leverage. Leverage. He'd been collecting leverage against her. There was a folder labeled Audio. Isabelle's finger hovered over it for a long moment before she clicked. The first file opened, and Marcus's voice filled her apartment. He was talking to someone, a man, laughing. It was recorded on what sounded like a phone, maybe a voice memo he'd made by accident. "Telling you, man, it's perfect," Marcus was saying. "Elena is so medicated she barely knows what day it is. And Isabelle thinks she's rescuing me. Women eat that shit up. The broken man who just needs the right person to save him." The other man laughed. "And when Isabelle figures it out, she won't. And if she does..." Marcus's voice turned cold. "I've got enough documentation to bury her. She helped me hide money from my abusive wife. She knowingly participated in an affair. Her career would be over if that came out, and she's too ambitious to risk it. You're a cold bastard, Marcus. I'm efficient. There's a difference." The audio ended. Isabelle sat frozen. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The man she loved, the man she'd given her savings to, the man she believed was trapped in suffering, had been playing her the entire time. She was not his salvation. She was his weapon. And Elena, God, what had she done to Elena? Isabelle opened the final folder with trembling hands. It was labeled E-documentation. Inside were photos. Elena at a grocery store, looking thin and exhausted. Elena sitting alone at a coffee shop, staring at nothing. Elena leaving what looked like a therapist's office, her face hollow. These weren't casual photos. These were surveillance. Marcus had been documenting his wife's deterioration, like a scientist documenting an experiment. There were medical records. How Marcus had gotten these, Isabelle didn't want to know. Elena's prescriptions for anxiety medication, antidepressants. Therapy notes that somehow Marcus had accessed. And there were older photos. Photos from 5 years ago, before Elena had married Marcus. In these, she was completely different. Vibrant, smiling, confident. There was one of her at an art gallery opening, standing next to her work, glowing with pride. Isabelle looked at that photo, then looked at the recent surveillance photos. It was like looking at two different people. And with horrible clarity, she understood Marcus had systematically destroyed this woman. And Isabelle had helped him do it. She was going to be sick. Isabelle ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. She sat on the cold tile floor, shaking, tears streaming down her face. All those conversations about Elena being controlling, manipulative, unstable, all lies. Marcus was describing himself and projecting it onto his victim. And Isabelle had believed him, had supported him, had loaned him money that he'd used to, what? Finance his psychological torture of his wife. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Thinking about you, missing you. Soon we won't have to miss each other anymore." Isabelle stared at the message. The man who'd sent this had just been revealed as a monster. But his words still sounded warm, loving, genuine. That was how good he was. That was how perfect his mask fit. She'd spent months falling in love with a persona that didn't exist. But Elena was real. Elena was a victim who probably had no idea help was even possible. Isabelle made a decision. She copied every file from a USB drive onto her laptop. Then she started searching for divorce attorneys in their city. Not for Marcus. For Elena. She found a firm that specialized in high-conflict divorces and coercive control. Their website had language that made Isabelle's heart race. "We help victims of psychological abuse document evidence, establish safety plans, and reclaim their lives." Isabelle picked up her phone with shaking hands and dialed the number. Law offices of Chun and Rodriguez. A receptionist answered. "I need to help someone," Isabelle said. "Someone who doesn't know she needs help." Attorney Sarah Chin listened to Isabelle's story for 45 minutes without interrupting. When Isabelle finished, exhausted, crying, shame washing over her in waves, Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Ms. Carter," she finally said, "what you're describing is a textbook case of coercive control, and the evidence you have could be critical in helping his wife." "I was part of it," Isabelle whispered. "I helped him. I believed him. I'm as guilty as..." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "You were manipulated by someone extremely skilled at manipulation. Yes, you had an affair with a married man, and that was wrong. But you were also a victim of his manipulation, even if the harm to you is different than the harm to his wife. What matters now is what you do next. I need to tell her. Elena, She needs to know she's not crazy. That's going to be complicated, Sarah warned. When you're the affair partner trying to reach out to the wife, she's likely to see you as the enemy. And if Marcus finds out you've turned against him, he will use everything he has to hurt you. I don't care. And Isabelle realized she meant it. Her career, her reputation, her savings, none of it mattered compared to helping undo even a fraction of the damage she contributed to. He needs to be stopped. I need to help stop him. Sarah nodded slowly. Then here's what we're going to do. Meanwhile, Elena was having the first moment of clarity she'd experienced in months. She was sitting in her car in a grocery store parking lot, unable to remember what she'd come to buy. The medication made everything foggy. Days blended together. She felt like she was watching her life from underwater. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Normally Elena wouldn't answer. Marcus had trained her not to. Told her it could be scammers or people try to upset her. But something made her click the green button. Hello? Elena Sullivan? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes. My name is Sarah Chun. I'm a family law attorney. I specialize in helping people in difficult marriage situations. I received some information about your case, and I'd like to speak with you confidentially. Would you be willing to meet? Elena's first instinct was panic. Marcus had told her that if lawyers ever contacted her, it meant he was finally going through with a divorce. It meant she was about to lose everything. It meant she'd failed. I don't think I should, Elena said. My husband doesn't think. Mrs. Sullivan, Sarah interrupted gently, what I need you to understand is that you have rights. Regardless of what you've been told, regardless of what you believe about yourself, you have options. I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to hear information about those options. Something in Elena's chest cracked. He says I'm sick. He says I need him. He says I can't. What if none of that is true? Sarah asked quietly. What if the person who told you those things has reasons to want you to believe them? Elena sat in her car, silent tears running down her face. I'm scared. I know, but you don't have to be alone in this anymore. Elena closed her eyes. In that moment, something shifted. It was small, barely perceptible. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider a dangerous possibility. What if Marcus was wrong? What if she wasn't the broken one? Okay, she whispered. I'll meet with you. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll send you the address. Elena, don't tell anyone about this meeting. Not yet. I won't. Elena hung up and sat in her car, trembling. She felt terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump with no certainty of what waited below. But anything was better than drowning slowly in the life she was living. The meeting that changed everything happened in a small conference room with gray walls and terrible fluorescent lighting. Elena arrived first, 15 minutes early, so anxious she thought she might pass out. Sarah Chin greeted her with a warm handshake and a kind smile that made Elena want to cry. Before we begin, Sarah said, I want you to know that everything discussed in this room is confidential. You're under no obligation to take any action. This is just information. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. There's someone else who asked to be here, Sarah continued. Someone who has information that's critical to understanding your situation. I need you to keep an open mind. Ooh. The door opened, and Elena's world tilted sideways. Isabelle Carter walked in. Elena recognized her instantly from the photos on Marcus's tablet. The affair partner, the other woman, the reason her marriage had finally, completely fallen apart. Get out, Elena said, her voice shaking with sudden rage. How dare you? Please, Isabelle said, and Elena saw that she was crying. Please, Elena, I know you have every reason to hate me, but I need you to hear what I have to say. Why would I listen to anything you? Because Marcus has been lying to both of us, Isabelle interrupted. Because he's not who either of us thought he was. Because I have proof that everything he's told you about yourself is a lie designed to keep you trapped. Elena stared at her. You're trying to ease your guilt. You want forgiveness. I can't. I don't want forgiveness, Isabelle said. her voice breaking. "I don't deserve it. What I want is to make sure he never does this to anyone else. And I want you to know the truth. You are not sick. You are not broken. You are not unstable. You're being abused." Sarah gestured to a chair. "Elena, please, just listen. If, after hearing everything, you want to walk away, you can. But I think you deserve to know what we've discovered." Slowly, Elena sat down. Isabelle sat across from her, and for a long moment, the two women just looked at each other. Two victims of the same predator, separated by a chasm of pain and betrayal, about to discover they were on the same side. Sarah opened a laptop. "I'm going to show you some documents. They come from a USB drive that Mr. Sullivan left behind. These documents reveal a pattern of deliberate psychological manipulation and financial control." For the next hour, Elena sat frozen as her entire reality reconstructed itself. She saw the financial records proving that Marcus controlled everything and always had. She read his strategic timeline for destroying her credibility. She listened to audio of Marcus laughing about her being so medicated she barely knows what day it is. She saw documents proving that Marcus had accessed her therapy records illegally, had influenced her psychiatric treatment, had deliberately worked to isolate her from everyone who might help her. And she learned about Isabelle's role, how Marcus had used her as a tool, how he'd lied to her just as comprehensively as he'd lied to Elena, how both of them had been pawns in his game. By the time Sarah finished presenting everything, Elena was sobbing, but these tears were different. They weren't tears of despair or self-blame. They were tears of rage. "I'm going to destroy him," Elena said quietly. "We're going to help you do exactly that," Sarah replied. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah worked with Elena to document everything. They subpoenaed financial records. They compiled years of evidence, text messages, emails, witness statements from friends Elena hadn't spoken to in years, but who remembered the gradual changes in her. They got statements from Elena's doctors about how Marcus had influenced her treatment. They documented the illegal access to medical records. They built a timeline of coercive control that was so detailed, so comprehensive, that it was impossible to deny. And Isabelle provided testimony about Marcus's strategic manipulation of her, his intentional use of their affair to terrorize Elena, and the financial deception he'd engaged in. Marcus, meanwhile, had no idea what was coming. He continued his routine, controlling Elena, promising Isabelle, moving through his life with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He assumed Elena was too broken to fight back. He assumed Isabelle was too invested to betray him. He assumed wrong. The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was at his office when the process server arrived. He read through the documents with growing disbelief, then rage. Elena wasn't just asking for a divorce. She was filing charges of financial abuse, coercive control, and illegal access to medical records. She was seeking full division of all assets, restraining orders, and criminal investigation, and listed as a key witness, Isabelle Carter. Marcus called Isabelle immediately. The call went to voicemail. He tried again, and again. Finally, a text came through. "Isabelle, don't contact me again. Everything you told me was a lie. Everything. I've given my testimony to Elena's attorney. I hope you get exactly what you deserve." For the first time in his life, Marcus felt something close to fear. The courtroom was packed on the day of the divorce hearing. Marcus arrived with his attorney, confident that he could still spin this. He had years of documented evidence of Elena's instability. He had witnesses who'd heard him express concern about her mental health. He could paint this as a vindictive wife trying to destroy a husband who'd only ever wanted to help her. But when he walked into the courtroom and saw Elena sitting at the plaintiff's table, something was different. She looked clear, present, like she'd woken up from a long nightmare. And sitting directly behind her, in the gallery, was Isabelle. The two women looked at him with identical expressions. Determination. Marcus's confidence flickered. The hearing began, and Marcus's attorney presented his case. "My client is a successful businessman who has supported his wife financially and emotionally throughout their marriage. Mrs. Sullivan has struggled with mental health issues, and Mr. Sullivan has been nothing but supportive, suggesting therapy, medication, and treatment. This divorce petition is a culmination of years of my client being blamed for problems that stem from Mrs. Sullivan's own psychological difficulties. Sarah Chin stood. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that tells a very different story. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Marcus Sullivan's carefully constructed narrative. Sarah presented the financial records showing that every account had always been solely in Marcus's name, that Elena had no independent access to funds, that Marcus had systematically isolated her from economic independence. She presented the audio recordings where Marcus laughed about Elena being medicated and controllable. She presented testimony from Elena's original therapist, the one Marcus had made her stop seeing, who described Elena as a woman living in fear and noted concerns about domestic abuse. She presented evidence that Marcus had illegally accessed Elena's medical records and used that information to manipulate her treatment. And then she called Isabelle to the stand. Isabelle walked to the witness box with her head held high, despite the shame written across her face. She was sworn in, and Sarah began her questions. Ms. Carter, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? I had an affair with Marcus Sullivan. Isabelle said clearly, I believed he was trapped in an abusive marriage and that I was helping him escape. And what did Mr. Sullivan tell you about his wife? Isabelle listed everything. The stories about Elena being controlling, paranoid, mentally unstable, dangerous. She described how Marcus had asked her to hide money, to provide alibis, to be part of his escape plan. When did you discover these claims were false? When I found a USB drive containing evidence of his actual pattern of abuse, evidence showing that he was systematically destroying his wife while manipulating me into being his accomplice. The courtroom was utterly silent. Marcus's attorney tried to discredit her. Isn't it true, Ms. Carter, that you're only testifying now because the affair ended? Isn't this just a scorned mistress seeking revenge? Isabelle looked directly at Marcus. The affair ended when I realized the man I thought I loved doesn't exist. The man I loved was a fiction. The man sitting over there is someone who uses people like weapons and then discards them. I'm not testifying out of revenge. I'm testifying because both Elena and I were victims of the same predator, and he needs to be stopped before he does this to someone else. Then Elena took the stand. She was nervous, her voice shaky at first, but as she spoke, strength bled into her words. She described years of psychological torment, the isolation from friends and family, the control of every financial decision, the monitoring of her location, her phone, her email, the deliberate undermining of her therapy, the sexual coercion disguised as marital obligation. He told me I was sick, Elena said, looking directly at the judge. He told me I was broken, that I needed him to survive, that no one else would ever want someone as damaged as me. And I believed him. For years, I believed him. But the only thing that was broken was the truth. He spent years deliberately breaking me down, and then he used my brokenness as proof that I was the problem. By the time the testimonies ended, Marcus looked like a cornered animal. His attorney tried to argue that this was all circumstantial, that Marcus's concern for his wife had been genuine, but the judge had heard enough. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Roberts said, removing his glasses to look directly at Marcus, in 30 years on the bench, I have seen many cases of domestic abuse. Most involve physical violence, which leaves visible evidence. But what you have done to your wife is, in some ways, even more insidious. You systematically dismantled her sense of self, her autonomy, her reality. You used financial control, social isolation, and psychological manipulation to create a prison without walls. And then, when she started to question that prison, you introduced another victim into the situation, Ms. Carter, specifically to terrorize your wife further and ensure she felt she had no escape. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up a hand. I am granting Mrs. Sullivan's petition for divorce. All assets will be divided equally, with the exception of accounts that Mr. Sullivan deliberately hid, which will go entirely to Mrs. Sullivan as compensation for financial abuse. I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting Mr. Sullivan from any contact with Mrs. Sullivan outside of court-monitored legal proceedings. And I am referring this case to the district attorney for investigation of potential criminal charges related to coercive control, financial abuse, and illegal access to medical records. The judge looked at Elena. Mrs. Sullivan, I want you to know that nothing that happened to you is your fault. You were not sick. You were not broken. You were systematically abused by someone who understood exactly what he was doing. I hope you find peace and healing." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling. Marcus sat stunned as the gavel came down. His attorney was already whispering urgently about appeals. But Marcus barely heard him. He looked back at the gallery and saw Elena and Isabelle leaving together, talking quietly. His weapons had turned against him. His victims had become his destroyers. For the first time in his life, Marcus Sullivan had lost control. Elena stood in her new apartment, modest but hers. Completely, legally, financially hers. The walls were painted a soft blue-gray, and afternoon light streamed through windows that overlooked a small garden. She'd started therapy again, with a specialist in trauma and coercive control. The fog of medication had lifted, replaced by real clarity. She was slowly, carefully rebuilding relationships with her family. Her sister had cried for an hour when Elena finally told her everything. "I knew something was wrong," her sister had said. "But he was so good at making it sound like concern, making me seem like the interfering family member. I'm so sorry I didn't push harder." "It's not your fault," Elena had replied, and she meant it. Marcus's greatest skill had been making everyone complicit in the abuse by making it invisible. She'd even started designing again. Small projects at first, helping a friend renovate a living room, creating mood boards just for herself. The creative spark she thought was dead forever was flickering back to life. There was a knock on her door. Elena opened it to find Isabelle standing there with 2 coffee cups. Their relationship was complicated. How could it not be? Isabelle had been the other woman, had believed Marcus's lies, had been part of Elena's worst nightmare. But Isabelle had also been the one who saved her, had given her the evidence that freed her, had stood beside her in court. They'd agreed to meet monthly, not as friends, not yet, maybe not ever, but as 2 people who share a unique trauma and understood each other in ways no one else could. "How are you?" Isabelle asked, handing Elena coffee. "Getting better. Slowly." Elena smiled. "I got a call from a gallery yesterday. They want to showcase some of my work." "Elena, that's amazing." "It's terrifying," Elena admitted. "Putting myself out there, being visible again, but also necessary. I can't hide anymore." Isabelle nodded. "I testified at a conference last week about recognizing signs of manipulation in relationships. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, admitting publicly that I was manipulated, that I helped hurt someone. But if it helps even one person recognize the signs earlier than we did, it's worth it," Elena finished. They sat in Elena's small living room, drinking coffee, talking about the slow process of rebuilding, about therapy and triggers, about the weird, complicated emotions that came with healing. "Do you think he understands what he did?" Isabelle asked suddenly. "Or does he still see himself as the victim?" Elena considered. "I don't think people like Marcus ever see themselves clearly. But honestly, I don't care anymore. He doesn't get to take up space in my head. That's the final act of taking my power back, refusing to wonder what he thinks or feels." "That's really healthy," Isabelle said with a small laugh. "I'm not quite there yet." "You will be." As Isabelle left, Elena stood at her window, looking out at the garden. The criminal investigation was still ongoing. Marcus's business reputation was destroyed. His colleagues had distanced themselves when the details of the case became public. His social circle had evaporated. But more importantly, Elena had her life back, herself back. She thought about all the women out there who might be where she was 2 years ago. Women who didn't realize they were being abused because their abusers wore masks of concern instead of rage. Women who blamed themselves for the cages they'd been locked in. She'd started writing about her experience. Maybe she'd publish it someday. Maybe she'd help someone else recognize that the voice telling them they're broken might actually be the source of the breaking. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Dinner tomorrow? I want to hear all about the gallery offer." Elena smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I love you. Love you too. So proud of you." And for the first time in years, Elena believed she was someone worth being proud of. Marcus Sullivan sat in his downtown apartment, significantly smaller than a house he'd lost, staring at his phone. 3 job offers had been rescinded after background checks revealed the court case. His professional reputation was in tatters. He'd tried to call old colleagues, old friends. Most didn't answer. Those who did made excuses to get off the phone quickly. He still didn't understand how everything had fallen apart. In his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. He'd been strong when Elena was weak. He'd been strategic when others were emotional. He'd simply played the game better than everyone else. Until the game had turned on him. Marcus opened a bottle of whiskey, poured himself 3 fingers, and drank it down. He told himself this was temporary. He'd rebuild. He'd find new territory. He'd be more careful next time. Because in his mind, there would be a next time. He hadn't learned, couldn't learn. People like Marcus Sullivan never saw themselves as the villains of the story. But this time, at least, his victims had escaped, and they'd made sure everyone knew exactly what kind of monster wore a charming smile. Because in the end, the most dangerous predators are the ones who convince you they're the prey, and the strongest survivors are the ones who refuse to carry their abusers' lies anymore. This is a story about control, manipulation, and the courage it takes to reclaim your reality when someone has spent years convincing you that reality itself is wrong.